Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalren, and recently a bunch of WoW PvPers came together in a forum post, which I saw watching Cdew stream, where they talked about PvP. Actually, let me just read the title. PvP has severe lack of non-damage buttons. And this basically talks a bit as a TLDR about how it looks like WoW PvP, while it might look balanced in Legion, and it looks like it might even be the most balanced expansion possible. Like, it has potential for it. Not saying it will be. It has the severe pruning of abilities left and right. There's a lot of passive-based abilities that make the game a little less fun to play. There's not as much of abilities that make a huge separation between great players and good players. There's less of that. I guess the core of PvP for WoW as what it is. There's a lot of just abilities gone out of the game, and a lot of high-rated PvPers are voicing their opinions on it. One of them being Cdew. And basically that's what I want to talk a bit about. I want to fill you guys in some of the points that people are talking about, basically to get you guys informed, and maybe we throw in some of my own thoughts, but I'm not really going to be stating my opinion on this. I'm mainly going to state a few thoughts that I have on it, but for the most part it's really up to you to decide what you think of this. I'll have links for everything down below, the original forum posts and everything. Most of this video is going to be unedited and uncut. Sorry if it's a bit long. Ability pruning. Basically, there's less separation between good and bad players by allowing ability pruning to take up in Legion. By taking away some spells out of the game, there are less, factors of separation between decent, good, average players and then some of the best players WoW has ever seen for PvP. For example, back in previous expansions, Shaman had more totems than what we currently have. Currently, Rest of Shamans can drop about a healing totem, a windwalk totem, grounding totem, tremor totem, and there's a slow totem, but my brain, the name escapes from my mind, but there's a slow totem there. Back in the day, there were a lot more totems for team-based buffs. I remember back in Pandaria, there was a Storm Strike totem that you could drop when your DPS are bursting, so you would increase the DPS of your DPS-based classes. Back in Cataclysm, there was a lot more totems for spellcasting, gaining back mana, increasing agility of other players, and those buffs basically allowed a shaman, like, let's say a shaman goes into arena, rest of shaman versus another rest of shaman, one team versus the other. The rest of shaman that keeps those buffs up the most, the ones that provides most buffs for his teammates and himself, ends up coming out to be the better player in the end than the other guy who's not dropping as many totems as the better player. And also the separations we're talking about, some special abilities, even just cooldowns that you just have to press on global cooldown, that separated good players who could micromanage all these things compared to decent players who just didn't even think about it or didn't try to keep them up for a longest time in duration. And I guess this is really what it comes down to as a big fear, like what was good back in PvP, how could you tell who was good compared to this simplistic, some people call it piece of crap that's coming out now. Warlocks had two different armors, for example, back at some point back in the day. I'm not a warlock, I don't really know warlocks well, but they had two different armors, demon armor and fel armor. As far as I understand, again, never played Warlock back then, Demon Armor was good for defensive play, and was probably the staple armor to go for PvP. But for Fel Armor could deal far more damage, maybe not that far more, but he definitely had more damage than Demon Armor. So the better Warlocks that knew how to play the game, if they aren't being trained, they swap into Fel Armor so they can deal more damage. And then they could swap back into Demon Armor once people start training them again. So the better players knew how to use all these extra abilities that other players would just not even find useful or deem decent. I guess it would be a lot like a rogue trying to swap for different poisons, right? Like I say, you have deadly and venomous wounds poison. You go in for venomous wounds, and let's say venomous wounds applies forever. Venomous poison applies forever on a target. And then you go into deadly so you can still deal more damage, because venom poison is already on target and it's going to last forever kind of deal. Like, it'll be those kind of separations, like the better players would use those gimmicky techniques to deal a little bit extra damage, to go the bit extra mile. Priest, for example, back in Cdew, I remember, had mana burn and they were able to punish bad healers. A good player was able to punish a bad player who stood in the open without cover. If someone wasn't playing the healer how it's supposed to be, then they could be punished by better players, and then eventually we'll weed out who are the better players, who are the lesser players, because you had all these mechanics to separate players, to allow the best players in WoW to compete at the highest level and weed out the weak, I guess, in a way. It's almost like, sounds like hardcore versus casual kind of discussion now that I'm looking at it, but that's another point differently. Priest had Shadow Word Death back in the day, and apparently it was the highest skill capability ever in the game. So Shadow Word Death, which is available to Shadow Priest right now, Shadow Word Death was available to Disc Priest and maybe even Holy Priest. I could be wrong, but I know it was available to one of those priests. And back then, you could use Shadow Word Death to launch an enemy. It'd be kind of a medium speed projectile, and if it hits an enemy who's above 20% health threshold or something like that, it would injure you, it would deal slight damage to your back. So these priests, this particular amazing priest, would be able to get themselves out of CC like Poly or Blind. As they would see that CC happening and about to hit them, they would hit the target with Shadow Word Death right before they CC'd. And as they get caught into a blind or a polymorph, they would break themselves out of the CC. So there was those little abilities that most players wouldn't use, but the better players would find more use out of them. And I guess that's what this conversation is really about. By taking away abilities, Blizzard is limiting what players can do with these abilities. Better players can get amazing plays outdone with those abilities, but with the abilities being removed, the line between a great player and a decent player is starting to blur, because there's not a specific factor to define players, to define one is better than the other. Now, without those mechanics, it really comes down to mechanics. Lining up your CC and heals and damage at the right moment, being accurate every time, basically being consistent. It's not as much about the plays that you can make, but it's more about consistency. If you can keep landing those traps every single time and just stun into a trap and making sure to cycle CC back to back to back, and if you do that better than the other team, usually that's what currently scores you wins in Warlords. Legion is making a lot of old spells into talents as well, which is another thing that is being brought up. People are saying there's not too many new abilities coming out for certain classes. And that's basically it. From what Cdew says, rather than implementing old abilities from back in the day as talents, they should instead bring new abilities that give you a whole nother playstyle. Like, for example, some of these things are baseline to certain classes that has been baseline at some point or another in expansion and are just being brought back as a talent. But they also make you decide which one is better than the other, and usually it funnels down to one obvious choice. For example, Shamans, Rest of Shamans, you know how they use Earth Shield? It's a baseline Shaman spell in WoD, but it becomes a talent in Legion. And I guess the big question is, at least Cdew has, why? Which is a good question. Now this is my personal thoughts. Personally for Rogues, I feel like we kind of lucked out. I took a look at the Subtlety, Assassination, Outlaw, Rogue, PvP talents, and class talents. And I think for the most part, we got decent talent options for those. Like, I mean, yeah, a lot of them are passives, especially for like Assassination, and not all of them are that amazing. But for the most part, we got at least decent options to pick between one talent or the other. Like, Killing Spree has been baseline for Combat Rogues, but with Outlaw Rogue being introduced, they kind of give you an option between Killing Spree, but also other talent trees, or other talents in that same tree to pick from. Like the Cannon Barrage, or I think Alacrity is the other name, I could be wrong, it's something about a given haste every time you use a finisher. I think those kind of abilities where you give you like something new, something interesting to replace what you knew, the good old, with a different alternate variation of it, I think that's interesting. But again, I feel like Rogues lucked out because for the most part, we have a couple different options, a couple different playstyles. And when like Killing Spree becoming a talent, at least they give you other cool options besides it. That, you know, you could think, oh, maybe, you know, in this specific situation, I could go for like Cannonball Barrage. Or the third one, whatever that is. So I feel like it creates a little bit more flavor. But not every single class has the same luck. Back to the main topic, a lot of passives in a game means there's a lot less active abilities being brought out. This means less skill needed to press your buttons, that some believe. Basically, it's basically, if there's passives, there's less buttons for people to press. And some people believe it kind of comes down to that some passives used to be an active skill, and back then, players that pressed those buttons on cooldown were better PvPers. And that used to create a bigger skill gap between good players and great players. But passives are by a few seen as a lazy way of creating like false mechanics where you don't actually interact. Like, I think in Cantor's Ward for mages, it used to be something you would just press on cooldown. Yeah, back in Pandaria, you would press it on cooldown, and mages that pressed it on cooldown dealt far more damage. But now that it's a passive, you don't really... I mean, I guess you can focus around with it and try to burst when you have 5 stacks, but for the most part, most people don't pay attention to it as much. I mean, if you can get an opportunity, you know, you go when you have 5 stacks because you need all the most damage. But for the most part, I don't see people just, you know, holding on. Whoa, hold on, I got almost Encounter's Ward, almost 5 stacks. It's those kind of things. Basically, some people believe that having more passive abilities means, you know, players can play sloppy, can play lazy, and there's a less of a gap between good players and great players. My thoughts on this, I kind of agree on this, I kind of don't. I kind of like passives. You know, I think they're a great part of the game. They shouldn't be taken out. I like passives that you have to monitor and you have to line up. Kind of like, I guess I'm gonna give you guys a bad example, like Deep Insight for Combat Rogues. Now, a lot of you are gonna be like, oh, Combat Rogue is easy, just spam Sinistrike. Just sit there and spam Sinistrike. And for some people, it's really as easy as spamming Sinistrike. But not everybody says, oh, just it's easy to spam Sinistrike. Not everybody is sitting at 2k MMR right now playing arenas, playing combat. I know that for sure. So I feel like that passive, for example, the Bandit's Guile, it's interesting in a way. You kind of have to keep your buff up. You have to find ways to keep the buff rolling. You have to monitor it. And that's, I guess, part of the fun playstyle, that it just gets you active with your spec. It gets you active with your class. Keeps you on your alert, keeps you on your toes, gives you a goal that you're trying to accomplish. I like those kind of buffs. I don't like RNG-based buffs, though. Like those random passives that are just so RNG. I'm not a big fan of those, because then it's like, might as well be playing Hearthstone. I see why passives that work for you when you need them are good. Like, oh, just easy passives, right? Just a passive, just when you need it, it'll deal more damage. But I can see why it could be lazy at the same time. It's really hard for me to decide whether it's passives are, you know, more passives is good or bad. It is good for balance of the game, because, you know, Blizzard can balance out the passives a little bit easier. Active abilities is, it depends how players use them, so there's a bit more unpredictable. It's a bit more unpredictable, is what I'm trying to get out. Still not going to edit this. Basically, these abilities make WoW balanced. The passives is, I guess, what I'm trying to come down to. I did say earlier that all these passives might make WoW one of the most balanced expansions possible. Like, there's a potential for it. I'm not saying it will be. I'm saying there's a potential. Because Blizzard will be able to fine-tune every single one of these talents and stats and everything. It is very possible for them to make the most balanced expansion ever. But it could be at the cost of some of the cool mechanics, such as Warriors. As far as I know, did they lose it? I don't know if they did, but Warriors... Imagine if Warriors didn't have Spell Reflect. A real fun spell that can literally change the whole dynamic of an arena. They can save you in a duel, right? What if they just make them, you just recharge it and you hit things really hard? And they just stick with Spell Reflect, stuff like that. I mean, yes, it creates this a bit less unpredictability that I was talking about earlier, but some people say it makes the game stale, and because that's where it comes down to. It might make the game really balanced, but at a cost of passive spells and abilities that are easy to handle. Another thought that I had, well, I guess I didn't have this thought, but somebody on Cdew stream had it. This could be due to the WoW movie coming out, the Warcraft movie. Not the World of Warcraft movie, but just Warcraft. And in the future, they're probably planning to bring in new players, maybe players that never played the game before, never PvP'd. So maybe that's where there's all so much pruning, so that all this new stuff happened in the game when people boost the character. Maybe that's where it's just not overwhelming for new players. Maybe that's what they're trying to go for, so that more players could play the game. Others say that they're basically making this game into a console game by pruning so many abilities. I feel like it's, I mean, let me break the joke. Realistic, I still feel like there's way too many abilities to put on the controller, but I can kind of see where they're going, or where they're coming from when they say it's a console-based game now, or looking like it will be. Some argue that this makes the game basically less fun overall. It can be completely balanced. The game can be completely balanced and be the most balanced thing ever, but Cdew says there's not as much of a fun factor that could be in it, or something along those lines. The game, like back then, he was reminiscing basically how fun it was back in Wrath, and maybe even a bit of Kata. He's even said MOP wasn't all that bad. So that's basically it. That's basically what people are talking about when they're talking about ability pruning and game being balanced, but maybe not amazing for PvP. It's a really hard topic to discuss. It's a really hard topic to talk about, because we just don't know the future of the game. This is the game that we've been playing for a while. You know, there's a lot of what ifs, what if maybes, kind of what if Blizzard you know, turns it all into the right direction. And it's like, what's weird about this is it looks like things are gonna look good, right? Things are gonna look great. Things are looking on the up and up. The Legion expansion seems to be like PvP oriented and PvP focused expansion. Like they're actually really putting some real effort into PvP. But is it really going to be that great for PvP? I guess is the question. Like it could be really balanced. It could have all these elements people asked for, but would it still be the same fun game we've known since before? Like, I guess in a different light, all these changes could be seen as negative. That's not what people actually want. They want more abilities. They want more unpredictability. They want to see players use all these different new abilities that Blizzard comes up with and see what players do with them. I don't know. It's really hard to... I can't even state any thoughts on it on my own. That's why I said I'm not even going to state my own thoughts. It's really hard to decide what I think of this, but what are your thoughts? Leave me in the comments below. This is everything that's been going on ability pruning that I saw from Cdew stream, and I read a bit on the forum post. I'll link all that down in the description below for you guys to check out. This isn't really my own 2 cents on it. This is just me talking about it. I don't know what to think of it, but what do you guys think? Comments, feel free. I'll see you guys in the next video.